Hello and welcome to this video on one of pharmacology and medicine's greatest scandals, thalidomide. This is a continuing saga that has far-reaching impact both for those who were born at this time and the pharmaceutical companies involved. Unfortunately, it also incorporates many who did not survive birth or died shortly afterwards. Some background is needed before we can explain what the thalidomide scandal is and was. The first is what thalidomide is and why it is used. Thalidomide is a morning sickness medication used during pregnancy. It was also sold as a sedative, but its use during pregnancy is the most important element of that. Pregnancy is a trying time for many, and among those there is another cohort who have morning sickness. That is vomiting violently first thing in the morning. This can be debilitating for some and anxiety-inducing in others again. Thalidomide stops this from happening. As such, it was a prescription medication available for quite some time. Thalidomide is a drug, and that should not be a surprise from what we've just said. What may surprise you is that thalidomide comes in two versions. One is a mirror of the other. This often produces a 50% mixture of each, or a racemic mixture. The ratios of each can be modulated by the use of an acid or base solution. There is a hydrogen in the center which will flip and turn the molecule to one side or the other. This is why newer methods of making thalidomide can produce 99% pure products from a reaction, and it is the usable form that does not lead to scandal. This molecule is also an analog of glutathione. That's a sedative and explains some of the uses that it was used for other than morning sickness. But it also explains some of the application that it did have. What it does not explain, and is still something of a mystery, is how it causes birth defects. Remember those pregnancies we mentioned? How morning sickness was treated with thalidomide? Well, it had another effect during pregnancy. It caused a wide range of birth defects. The most well-known of these is the failure of long bone development. That is, the bones in your arms and legs particularly. The reason it is so very recognizable is that many of the children, and now adults, presumably having survived, had to be born with these defects, and they either had no limbs to speak of, but did have hands and feet, or had truncated arms and legs with hands and feet at the ends. While it is the most easily recognized of all the symptoms, limb development is not the only problem. There was also eye, heart, urinary tract, and more defects that were all congenital. This contributes heavily as to why there were so many issues with children being carried to conception. What is affected and how severely is related to when thalidomide was prescribed and used by the mother. If it was taken from the 20th day of pregnancy onwards, it could cause central brain damage. Day 21, the eyes. Day 22 onwards, the ears and face. Day 24 onwards, arms and legs. Anything up to day 28. After day 42, it would not damage the development of the fetus. There is a wide range of theories as to exactly how thalidomide achieved this result. And one of the complicating factors is that there are two different forms, one of which appears to be relatively safe, and the other is safe so long as it's taken well into gestation. The mechanisms of action include acylation of macromolecules, affecting ascorbic acid synthesis, downregulation of various receptors, particularly those involved in cell adhesion, cytokine synthesis alterations, folic acid antagonism, inhibition of DNA synthesis, oxidation of DNA, glutamate metabolism interference. Then there are some others that are not as well established. Things like oxidative stress and damage, DNA intercalation, inhibition of angiogenesis, and interfering with bindings of various things. All of these lead to the factors and effects that we've mentioned. Some of them are more stark than others. Others are destructive to life and will end it prematurely. Others again will lead to lifelong disability. The reason we know about it at all is not because of that. At the time, it was initially put down to pure bad luck. The identification of this scandal was not through the current methods which we are now familiar with. This includes things like post-market surveillance, compulsory reporting of abnormalities, and government oversight. It was from watching the data in a small sample and then testing the theory on a larger scale. One doctor called William McBride noticed that there was an increasing number of patients coming through his clinic that had abnormalities, notably those deformations we've mentioned already. He waited a little bit to see what would happen over time, and noted that this continued to show up. After looking into it a little bit further, he noticed that all of the babies were had by mothers who were using thalidomide. He then wrote to other doctors via the Lancet to establish whether or not this was occurring elsewhere, and describing what he had observed. This led into what is now a full-blown theory and pretty well established to not just be a theory, but established fact. Thalidomide, at the times mentioned, causes birth defects. As a result, the drug was withdrawn from the market in 1961, the same year William McBride wrote his letter to the Lancet Medical Journal. We've mentioned how not only did it have serious repercussions for the individuals who've lived, there's also the repercussions for the parents who had these children. There are the children who did not survive. The drug itself was an interesting discovery, and how it came about is a bit weird. It was discovered by a German group trying to find a new antibiotic after the Second World War. Although they didn't find an antibiotic, they did find a new sedative, which was eventually put to market. Unfortunately, at this time, there wasn't a great deal of oversight or regulation when it came to medical research, and in fact, as is the case demonstrated, pharmaceutical research. Drugs could be relatively easily sent onto the market and approved. Even the FDA at this time, while they didn't reject the application, didn't approve it either, waiting on more information. This did not prevent thalidomide from being sold widely in Europe, Australia, and Japan. In those areas alone, the whole debacle affected at least 10,000 people, and those are just people who lived long enough to be recorded. Estimates are as high as 20,000 could have been in this category, and there are also those pregnancies which could not be carried to birth due to congenital defects. The upside to this scandal is that it prompted many countries to introduce tougher rules for the testing and licensing of drugs. This is one of the big reasons why we now have post-market surveillance. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.